My mixing. I'm the Early Child Education Policy Director at Children First, and we are part of the Kids Campaign, which is a coalition of over 80 child-serving organizations here in Philadelphia. And our main agenda is to make sure that kids are front and center during this mayoral campaign and that the next mayor has a policy agenda that puts kids first. So thank you for joining us today, Rebecca. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you are not speaking, if you could please keep the mute on so that we can have a clear conversation. And we have people monitoring the chat, and so they will mute you if there's like other sounds going on. We are recording this too for folks that can't attend with us today. So this is an Ask Me Anything session with Rebecca Rhynhart. We know that the primary is right around the corner, and a recent poll showed that there was a 5-way tie between the front runners, with 20% of voters still undecided.
That's right.
So, some of those undecided voters might be with us here today. We have 30 minutes, a little less than 30 minutes at this point, to hear from you about your thoughts on early child education. And obviously early child education is a really important part of a healthy early learning experience. And so we have early childhood providers here, we have parents here who all want to hear from you about what your thoughts are on early child education. So I'll kick it off with the first question, and then we'll open it up for everybody else. The first question is, what would you do in the first 90 days to expand early learning opportunities in neighborhoods?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me here this afternoon. It's wonderful to be here. I'm Rebecca Rhynhart, and to answer your question around early childhood education, I mean, it's incredibly important, and I supported the soda tax back when it was first proposed because I support pre-K and community schools and rebuild. And as city controller, I exposed that less than 50% of that money was actually going to the three things that it was supposed to fund. And as mayor, I would make sure that that money is actually going to where it was told to the people it would go. So in my first 90 days, I would first work with community providers in the neighborhoods to make sure to hear from them about what the city is doing right and wrong regarding the Office of Education, regarding early childhood education, our pre-K, what could be done better, and to make sure that all of our neighborhoods are getting the services that our kids need. My daughter is 13 in the public school system, but I know how much pre-K matters to kids in terms of their development, and early childhood education is so important. So I would also make sure that all relevant stakeholders, including the Kids Campaign, were brought into the room after May 16th to talk further about what the most successful city leadership would look like in terms of support to the neighborhoods to make sure that kids are getting what they need regarding early childhood education before kindergarten. I have a whole separate plan on education on the school district, which I'm sure we'll get to. But those are some of my thoughts on early childhood ed.
Thank you. I want to move on to our first question from the audience, which is from Eunice Bay. She asks, how would you implement an equitable early childhood system in Philadelphia, not just for childcare slots, not just for children who are receiving it, but also pay parity for early educators?
Yeah. So it's a pretty well-known issue that early childhood educators do not get paid at the level that they should be getting paid. And as mayor, I will work with providers, and also in terms of the city contracting with pre-K providers to talk to them about salary levels. I mean, I'm a firm believer that the minimum wage should be at least $15. That's what I'll advocate at the state level. And I think it should be tied to inflation so that it goes up at 3% or whatever the inflation level is each year, so that, it's good paying work to work with kids, because our kids are the future here in Philadelphia. And in terms of other supports, I'll also work to make sure that families that have food insecurity, that have housing insecurity, have the resources that they need, because that's part of early childhood development as well, to make sure that the basic needs of children are being met. So I have a long-term poverty plan, which involves fixing the education system in our city and creating job pathways from our poorest neighborhoods to good paying jobs. But also part of my anti-poverty plan is making sure that people's immediate needs are met, that families' immediate needs are met. And that as city controller, I propose that the city use about $18 million out of the $1.4 billion that the city received from the American Rescue Plan money from the federal government to use for a basic income pilot for our neediest families. That's something that LA and other cities have done. It's been found to be tremendously successful, and it is part of taking care of our kids. As well as part of my platform is to invest in our library and rec center programming in our neighborhoods that need it the most. We need to make sure that as a city, we're looking at service delivery from an equity perspective. And what that means is that we need to make sure that our neighborhoods that have the most poverty, that have the most disadvantage, that also have the highest violence rates, are getting the best services in terms of library, in terms of rec, in terms of trauma treatment, and fixing our schools, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for answering those questions. We have questions that came in directly to me. I'm monitoring the chat. So how would you work with the state's Office of Children Development and Early Learning, OCDEL, to ensure coordinations of early care and education services in order to maximize funding streams for early childhood programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is something that I know a lot about from my work as the city's budget director, looking at city funding streams, and then also seeing this funding streams come in from the state and federal government. We don't get that much from the federal government as much as we used to, but we get a significant amount of money for different services from the state, for behavioral health, for DHS, and other services. And so much of what the city needs to do involves better coordination between departments and better coordination between the city and the state. As mayor, I will work with state leadership, with the governor and his cabinet and the department heads to make sure that we are matching our funds in a way that makes the most sense. That the piece that the state is funding and the piece that the city is funding, that we are complementing each other instead of working in silos. That's something that I've done in the past, and as mayor will shepherd that through.
Great, thank you. We have a couple more questions in the chat. It's hopping here. Chenille asked, how will you make childcare affordable for all families, especially when families get kicked off the subsidy system due to making only $1 over the eligibility threshold?
Yeah, this is a significant issue, and childcare affordability is a major problem across our country and in our city. That we need to make sure that there's more options that are affordable. And we also need to make sure that we're paying workers, all of our residents, a living wage, so that people can afford childcare. And part of that is making childcare more affordable. But that's why I've supported increase to the minimum wage. That's why I've supported changes in making sure that there's transparency around wages by gender. And we need to make sure that it is more affordable. Part of that is the city's sponsored pre-K. Part of that is lifting people out of poverty and making sure that people have pathways to have real career jobs and career advancement to be able to afford it. And we need, as mayor, I would work with the state to make changes to the eligibility requirements so things like that don't happen. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense that if you make $1 over the eligibility requirement, suddenly you're not eligible anymore. And you actually have to cut back on hours in order to be eligible. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense to anyone. So as mayor, I would work with the state and others to get changes to these rules passed so that they just make sense for people, because everyone can agree on certain things, just not being sensible. And we just need to work together to get it done.
Great, thank you. The next question is about infants and toddlers. It comes from Sharon Nielsen, and she asked, Philadelphia is currently only investing in preschool, so 3 and 4-year-olds and school age. However, research demonstrates that the greatest learning as far as brain development goes starts between birth to 3. What would your plan be as mayor to support families with infants and toddlers as it relates to accessibility and affordability of early care and early learning? So similar to the previous question around affordability, but specifically for infants and toddlers.
Yes, so this is a great question. And as mayor, I will spearhead an effort around public health, particularly around women and families, because the statistics are pretty stark in terms of the issues with health, especially with women's health and disparity along racial lines. And as mayor, I would want to make sure that we are providing all of the health benefit and health needs of our infants to 3 years old. And that's about supporting families. I would work with area hospitals. You know, with Hahnemann closing in North Philadelphia, with Hahnemann closing, there's not a hospital close in that North Philadelphia region. And so we need to think creatively around this. And as mayor, I would work with the city's health centers and with area hospitals and healthcare providers and nonprofits that work in this space to make sure that there are programs and there is outreach so that people moms and dads can get the help that they need with their young children and with young children's health and healthy development.
Great. More questions. The next one is around going back to the soda tax. Besides the soda tax, what other initiatives have you supported that relate to the childcare sector?
Yeah, so did you say other than soda tax? Is that what you?
Other than the soda tax.
What initiatives have I supported in the childcare sector?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of my initiatives and plans as mayor involve supporting families, and supporting families is related to children's health and also related to affordability. So childcare, the issues with childcare and being able to afford the childcare, and also having good childcare available are about raising people's income levels, are about the city working better together with the state, are about expanding pre-K. And those are all things that I care deeply about as a mom, as a resident of our city, and as a leader in our city. And my work in the city involving auditing the departments, I've noticed and called out issues, and would continue to work towards this to fix things in our city. And I would like to work with the kids campaign further to understand the issues as you see them, and how the city could be a better leader and partner from your perspective for families across our city.
Great.
Thank you.
Chanel asks, we are overwhelmed with behaviorally and mentally challenged children as young toddlers. What supports would you bring to assist parents and providers / educators? So this question is about behavioral and challenging behaviors in the early childhood sphere.
So the city of Philadelphia spends $1 billion a year on behavioral health services. That's addiction and mental health support. But often people in our city don't get the services that they need. And I'm raising this because we need to be very much more focused and intentional around that money, and make sure that early childhood development and care is at the level that it should be, given the level of dollars that the city of Philadelphia gets and the 270 providers that the city contracts with. And as part of my plan for the school district, I plan to align city services with the school district. So for example, if a school, every school should have a nurse, a social worker, and a therapist, in my view. And if a school does not have, for example, a therapist, then the city's behavioral health department should provide access through the city resources. And that's the type of coordination that I will lead as mayor, that we need to look at the city resources together with the school district to make sure our kids are getting what they need.
Great, thank you. Our next question is about gentrification. So Philadelphia is becoming one of the most gentrified cities in this country. The impact of this is that families cannot afford housing in certain neighborhoods, and current residents are experiencing high property taxes, and childcare providers who are renting space are having to close due to landlords seeking to sell properties to developers. What would you do to support the housing needs of low-income, elderly, and childcare businesses impacted by gentrification?
Yeah. So I've put forth a housing plan on my website, rebeccaforphiladelphia.com. And this has several components. One, using the 8,500 city-owned vacant properties and lots to build affordable housing. And also for homeowners, making sure homeowners can stay in the communities where property taxes are rising, through making sure that people know of the city programs that are available. So the longtime owner occupied program, as well as the senior tax freeze, specifically related to childcare providers, pre-K, preschools that are in neighborhoods that might be gentrifying, so they can't afford the rent anymore, which I think is the very specific question. One thing that I'm interested in that other cities have done is a business legacy grant, which is a grant that goes to businesses to help subsidize rent in areas that are gentrifying, in order to hold the longtime businesses in a community there, right? So this is using intentional city dollars to stabilize the community businesses and providers that the community needs. And I would be very interested in implementing that here along our commercial corridors, because that will enable longtime businesses, and I say business, I mean providers, right? So childcare, preschool could be able to stay, because gentrification is upending communities, and communities need stability. And stability is part of community health. And in order to have childcare facilities that are close to people's residents and neighborhoods, we need to make sure that businesses can afford to stay there. And so that would be part of my plan as well.
Great. The next question is about coordination of services between the early childhood sector and the school district. So how can the early childhood sector have access to the same resources, such as behavioral and mental health, as the school district, especially when the needs are very similar?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that what we could do is just even thinking about that question is under my leadership, I'll have a strong mayor's office of education, which will be coordinating the city services with the school district. But we should also have an early learning or early childhood development office or unit that's also coordinating to make sure that as needs are identified from providers, that the city can match the services that it gets from the state, the money that the city gets for behavioral health support into early childhood development providers. And that's something that I think would work incredibly well and would help guide the funding and the support services that the city can provide into the early childhood providers in the neighborhoods, so that the children are getting the resources and the help that they need to grow and prosper. Because we all know how important it is for that intervention and the work to be done when children are young, to make sure that they can grow in a healthy way.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go up to a question I skipped earlier from Eunice about ensuring that all stakeholders are at the table when you're making decisions. How will you ensure that stakeholders of all types, including providers, are included when you're making policy decisions as it relates to early child education?
Well, as mayor, I would bring key stakeholders, including Kids Campaign and early childhood providers, to the table. I've done this as I bring to people with different viewpoints and different stakeholders around the table to make decisions. It's how I led as city controller. As with any big initiative in my office, when I did the investigation into what went wrong with the city's response to the civil unrest following George Floyd's murder, I pulled together a group of stakeholders, a community council of people from every neighborhood, from every background, to discuss and lead and guide the work. And I would do the same thing as mayor to make sure that all of the voices are heard, because that will lead to the best policy outcome. When policy outcomes are decided without the people who are actually impacted, the experts in the field, the people that are actually working in the field, the policy is not going to be a good one. The policy is going to be much better if we bring people that are most impacted to the table. And that's what I'll do as mayor.
Thank you. Kashmir asked if you have any creative or pivoting plans that you could implement to help the childcare sector beyond just inserting more bills and laws.
Yeah. Coordination of city resources. So coordination, for example, of the $1 billion that the city gets in behavioral health money, the public health centers, and the money that the city gets for public health. It needs to be coordinated better. And this is something that I've seen in my years working at the city. I spent about close to a decade working for the city before running for office and running for city controller in 2017. I was the budget director for 5 years. I had other roles. And one thing I saw is a real lack of coordination between city departments. And as it relates to childcare, I think that by coordinating the services that we as a city and county provide, behavioral health, public health, we can increase the level of service delivery into children and childcare providers.
Great, thank you. We're almost at time. So I want to give you a little time to wrap up and say a few words before we call it a night.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to address all of you here, and to thank you for the work that Kids Campaign has done. The children are the future of our city, and I believe strongly that we must take care and foster and really embrace our youth, and that starts with young children, young babies. And that's the type of outlook that I'll bring to the mayor's office. I am the most experienced candidate running for mayor in terms of my city executive experience. I'm the only one running that has run a city office. I've run the controller's office and run it successfully for the last 5 years. I've managed a union workforce, and I can hit the ground running on day one to fix our city, right? To make it safer and cleaner, to fix the schools, and to fix these issues in the childcare sector, and to work with you as a partner. So I look forward to that, and I hopefully can gain your support on May 16th. And just want to say thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
So again, good evening. My name is Tyrone Scott. I'm from First Up. We are one of the 80+ organizations that form the Kids Campaign Coalition, trying to really ensure that kids' issues are front and center for our next mayor. We want to make sure that all kids are secure and safe, and we want to make sure high quality early education is part of that plan for everybody and is available to everyone in the city. We do have 2 candidates joining us today. For folks joining us, Mr. Jeff Brown will be first. In about a half hour, we'll bring on Cherelle Parker. Each candidate will have uninterrupted time to answer your questions, which we do ask. I'm going to ask folks to put themselves on mute, please, because again, we only want to hear from Mr. Brown. We are going to ask you to please put your questions in the chat, and what we're going to do is we will read them out so that we don't have a lot of background noise and such. So again, please put your questions in the chat. And Mr. Brown, I'm going to start you off with the first question as people are starting to join us and put their questions in the chat, if that's all right.
Sure.
Jumping right in, since we know we have limited time. What would you do in your first 90 days to expand early learning opportunities?
So one big opportunity I see is what the current pre-K program is city funded. And it's universal, so it doesn't require income verification application that the state used to require. And what I would like to do is I would like applicants to also fill out the state pre-approval, so the state could fund the pre-K. And this way we could expand the number of slots. I think we might be able to at least double the number of slots that way, because a lot of the young people would qualify for state funding for pre-K. And so I would like to move to more of a blended system. And I would also like to guarantee there's a slot for every young person that has parents that would like them to be in there. And so even if we had to raise the budget, I believe in early childhood education. What I'm most concerned about is reading. I think if you can't read, and a lot of Philadelphians can't read up to level, I think you're locking yourself into poverty, and we can prevent that problem by getting them into pre-K and getting them reading as early as possible.
Thank you so much. I'm also joined by Sim Lowe, who will also be joining some questions, kind of co-hosting with me. So Sim, if you have a question from the chat.
Yes, we do. First question is from Erica. She asked, she said, good evening, Mr. Brown. What are your thoughts about increasing ECE wages, just like workers in your store?
Say that one more time. I didn't follow that.
Oops, sorry. She said, what are your thoughts about increasing ECE wages, just like workers in your store?
What's ECE mean?
Early childhood education. Early childhood education.
Okay, so in my stores, we're unionized, and we have a union contract, and every employee, regardless of their age, are subject to the union contract, and our wages, benefits, child care benefits, which is very unusual in retail, and retirement benefits are collectively at the high end of a retail job. I want to say my average employee makes with benefits $38 an hour. And so I think our wages are pretty good. And it's a pretty good first job to learn how to work. I think over my career, I've hired, I'm sorry, can you hear?
We can hear you, Mr. Brown.
I've hired 60,000 people in my business over my career, and I see how they've done well. So I think a grocery job's a very good job. And if you're going to work in the grocery business or retail, a unionized grocery store is going to give you much better overall compensation.
That's great. I think Erica's question is, how do you make it happen to early childhood educators in the city, providing the
Oh, okay. I didn't understand that. So
Sorry.
what we have is a real dilemma in that the public sector and all of us know that the wages are too low, and it's very hard to attract educators that meet the pre-K standard. Yet the reimbursement rate, it doesn't really allow you to pay enough. And so the reimbursement rate needs to be increased, and then we could require a higher starting rate. And that will help increase the quality of our educators, but it's not fair to mandate it without increasing the reimbursement.
Thank you for that answer. We have a question from Melissa in the chat, which I believe goes back to your first answer, saying that you believe in access for everybody. She wanted to know if that meant all ages. Currently, PHL pre-K is just for 3s and 4s before they go to kindergarten. Are you seeing a universal childcare where 0 to 3 are also included?
Yeah, I really believe the child care is a tremendous opportunity to help people out of poverty. Because if you have kids and you can't afford child care, you can't work. And I don't think that's good. That's not good for anyone. People who want to work should be able to work. And I think that we should have an expansion of the ages to allow people to work. I offer child care as a benefit as part of our labor agreement. I think that's been a very positive thing. I think the city should look at that for their labor agreements. So we expand the number of families that could take advantage of that. And I do believe the state, if you're lower income, will pay for it. And that's why I'm saying I want that income verification filled out so we could pre-approve more people for that state benefit.
Thank you.
So the next question is from Cherelle about mental health services. Her question is, within the early childhood sector, there is an extreme need for services for children and family. How could you help in ensuring that the organizations in the city have the funding they need to provide adequate amount of support?
So our community behavioral health, is a nonprofit that works in association with the city and has a contract to handle our behavioral health, and it's funded by Medicaid, and it gets $1.6 billion a year. And what I noticed in the behavioral health world, a lot of the innovations that happened in the physical health have not moved over to mental health. And I'm talking like the availability of online services, the availability of lay people at a lower cost to provide certain services. For example, my wife and I started Uplift Workforce, a nonprofit that helps criminally justice involved individuals. And we use cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's taught by our teachers. It's not taught by a psychiatrist, and it doesn't need to be taught by a psychiatrist. So there are different forms of education that can help you with behavioral health issues, but you don't need a therapist for all of them. And so I think there's innovation needed. We have 1.6 billion. It's an awful lot of money. We should be able to redesign how we do things so we serve everybody and meet them where they are.
Ron, we have a question from Chanel Hunter. Again, going back to one of your previous answers, you mentioned making sure that we do income verification so we can see what programs people are qualified for. She mentions that there are definitely families that are losing their eligibility for services, and sometimes they're literally just $1 over the income requirement, and this really poses an issue for them. What would you be able to do in your administration about that?
Yeah, this is the cliff, the income cliff. Well, for pre-K, we have universal pre-K. I would sustain that, and if you're $1 over, we'll pick up the cost as part of our universal pre-K. As far as every
recording in progress.
As far as every other entitlement, it's a much more complicated story. And I think the best thing we could do is a lot of people don't get what they're entitled to. And I think we can help to make sure people fill out their paperwork, get what they're entitled to. We advise them, the best way possible to get the maximum benefits. And in some cases, because of the way the law works, I don't know what we could do other than advise people. And I know, like, for example, I have people that work for me and their Social Security benefits will only allow them to have a certain income. And we work with them to stay at the appropriate income. And that's just an unfortunate problem with the way a lot of these benefits work. And I'm not really sure because you're talking about changes in state and federal law, which is really something that would be very difficult for a mayor to do. I'm not sure if there is a better answer than that, except for in certain instances like pre-K, the city could wrap around its own benefits so it's continuous and we don't have a benefit cliff.
And speaking of the city pre-K program, there's a questions about that from Melissa. She's asking, would you ensure that pre-K is all day, that there is also before and after care provided? Because the current pre-K, Philly pre-K program is only a few hours. It's like a part-day program.
Yeah, well, that's a cost issue. And so I think it would be good to have an all-day option. Or if you can't fund the all-day option, it would be good to allow the pre-K operators to offer an option to parents to extend it. And if they're income appropriate, we might be able to extend it at the expense of the state instead of the city. And if they have the income, they should be able to stay in the same place and not have to move the children around. And so I do think we have some design adjustments to smooth out those problems and make it, like more convenient and more workable for someone who works a full-time job.
And we also have a questions from Chanel about, well, as you know, early childhood education sector is currently experiencing a staffing crisis. So her question is, what educational program or initiative will you bring for early childhood education workers or teachers to further their educations to support the ECE staffing crisis?
So what I would like to do, and it would start with early childhood educators, but continue to school teachers. I would like to have a school in Philadelphia dedicated to training teachers and early educators. And I would like to really make sure we do a good job of having a lot of diverse students in that program so we can diversify our educators, because I think in some cases we're not as diverse as we want. And I think the way you make it enticing is in high school, we should allow these students to take community college classes and get a jump on their education. And so there's less to pay for when they graduate. And I would add to that, if you commit to stay with us in Philadelphia, we should give scholarships to pay for the rest of their education in exchange for committing to stay with us for a certain period of time. I do that in my workplace, and I found it to be very helpful to remain staffed and to have a pipeline of new people ready to go.
Thank you. And there are a few questions regarding different various funding streams from the state, the federal, and the city. So as mayor, how would you work with the state's Office of Children Development and Early Learning, OCDEL, to ensure coordinations of early care and education services in order to maximize funding streams for early childhood programs?
So from a strategy standpoint, our funding should always wrap around federal and state funding. So they fit together like hand in glove. I would really think that we should work hard to make our requirements very similar, so you don't have a situation that it's so complicated to figure it out. And I know sometimes if we do that, we won't get exactly what we want, but it makes utilization much better. And I know they don't have the same criteria today, and that's a real complication. And so I think the best thing we could do is to adjust our programs to fit hand in glove with state and federal programs, just to expand the number of eligible people.
It's a question here from Erica around increasing challenging behaviors that teachers are seeing in early childhood classrooms. And she's wondering if you have any thoughts on how the next mayor could help with that. It's really causing not just challenges for staff, but also exiting for staff, as a lot of them are leaving because the supports just don't seem to be there for these educators.
Yeah. Are you saying that the children have trauma and are acting out, or explain to me a little more about what you're saying?
So, and people, you feel free to write in the chat if I understand your question. But a lot of early educators have been saying that yes, they're seeing children behave in ways that are very challenging, and the system, both behavioral health and early intervention, seem to be pretty backed up. So when families are trying to get services and we're trying to get referrals for either one-on-one support or some kind of therapist, I've heard of people on waiting lists since last August. So it's really becoming very challenging for teachers who are trying to manage an entire classroom and give that particular child what they need without any support. And they're wondering if there's anything that you might be able to do as the next mayor.
I think so. And I talked about community behavioral health and the need to reform it, to expand services at the amount of resources they have. And I think getting behavioral health support at a young age has a tremendous dividend, because addressing it young, you will help the behavior for the rest of their lives and their outcome, as far as finding their way out of poverty, having a productive relationships, not getting involved in the criminal justice system. So I really think that should be a high priority, and we should come up with solutions like online therapy, so you could serve the children right in the facility they're at. And let's address it as early as possible so we could help them before something bad happens. And I do think that is not a lot to ask, and that can be done.
There are many questions coming in, so I'm just choosing one for you. So Minette asks, if elected, what 3 steps would you take to put early childhood education system on a firmer financial setting?
Well, I would look to increase the reimbursement and increase the starting rate for early educators to meet the criteria. I would look to take advantage of state funding so we have more total dollars and expand the enrollment. I also would like to have technical assistance grants for operators to help them improve the quality of their service, and so they could get the appropriate amount of stars and be more secure that they're going to continue their work. I do think we could also make grants available for capital improvements, which could be very difficult to fund, or if not grants, loans to help upgrade the facilities. I think all of those things would be very helpful. And a final thing is communicating with our citizens. And I think that we should spend more resources on outreach to get young people into these programs, to fill up the census in our infrastructure. Because, one of the ways to make an early childhood center work is to have a full census.
Driving, arguing. Look, she's driving, arguing. Like, that sounds going to be an accident.
We're going to ask that folks mute themselves while we continue here. Another question that came up from Ernie. How will your administration help families know about the multiple programs out there, including Learning Stems, PHL Pre-K, Childcare Works, Pre-K Counts, Head Start? So many families don't understand that there are multiple programs.
Yeah, I think it's a huge problem. And to tell you the truth, I don't know how anyone can figure this out on their own. You really need an intake process that, I think it starts out with a one-stop intake process. You give all the facts and we direct you to where you belong in the system. And I think it should be available online, in an 800 number, and in person. So the first step when you have a 3-year-old child that you want to get into pre-K is you should have an intake process to make sure we're steering you in the right direction. And we should have as many access points to that as possible. So we're making it very easy for parents to get to the right spot in the system.
So there's a question going back to the behavioral health issues. There are definitely families that don't have Medicaid, which is one of the ways that we have those services funded. Is there a way that you foresee helping those families?
To my understanding, in our behavioral health system, you don't need Medicaid to take advantage of their services, but someone could correct me if I'm wrong about that. But whatever insurance they have, it's potentially billable, but sometimes mental health isn't billable. But my understanding about the community behavioral health, they offer those services to all the citizens, and that they don't necessarily need to have Medicaid. But the services should be widely available because they're necessary, and we have a lot of trauma in our city, and I don't know how you operate without those services.
Absolutely, and thank you for that clarification. Stephen asked, childcare programs seem not to be prioritized like K-12 as far as safety and security. Do you have any thoughts on connecting early educators with other resources for their safety?
Well, our whole city's not safe right now. We have a depleted police department. We're missing like 25% of our police. We have inadequate investments in forensics and gunshot cameras that would prevent crime and help us prosecute the people that are really wreaking havoc with us. And I think as you secure the whole city and make this a safe city, you will have the benefit of enjoying the safety in every aspect of society, including pre-K. Now, when students are going to school or pre-K and coming home from school or pre-K, I think we have to secure those time slots because they're risky that a kid could be hurt. And I think we need a fully staffed police department to do it. There should be a visible presence to make sure our kids are safe.
Excellent. As I'm so many questions coming in, just trying to make sure we get to questions from different folks. There is a question around family childcare in the city. Folks wondering what can we do to support them, as a lot of the state programs aren't available to family child care providers. Again, people who provide care out of their home for a smaller setting for families that want that for their child. Do you have any thoughts around how we can support them, knowing they are not eligible for things like the state's pre-K counts and programs like that?
Yeah, I mean, they made changes for home health aides, and they allow family members to take care of the elderly or people with disabilities. And it's very intriguing to expand that, in this case. And that would be something that we'd have to go to the state and advocate for. But I think it's actually quite a good idea. And it might even be a savings because, you don't have to reimburse for buildings and capital and all the overhead costs. And so I think it's a very intriguing idea. I haven't thought about it before, but I think there's a case to be made to go to Harrisburg and lobby or try to set up a test program, because I think it could be very beneficial.
Hand me my phone, Malia. Malia, hand me the phone.
Yeah, we're going to ask folks to keep themselves on mute as we have about 6 or 7 minutes left with Mr. Brown. You mentioned disabilities, and someone did ask in the chat. Could you speak to what your administration would do to help families with children with disabilities?
Yeah, it's so bewildering, the complexity of our systems. And I think the first thing you need a single entry point where someone has experienced like a social worker or someone who is an expert in navigating the federal and state and city systems to help people get the right, get them to the right place, understand all that. There's a lot of terminology here that's very confusing, help educate them on the terminology. And, I don't think we do a good job. Like if you're very, very educated, you do well because you could fend for yourself. If you're impoverished and not as educated, I don't know how you get through it. And I think we need an advocate for that community to get them what they're legally entitled to. And I hear a lot of problems about the confusion. And when they explain it to me, I find it very confusing and complicated. So I think that where we would invest prudently is get an advocate to help people. A system of advocacy.
Speaking of advocacy, there's an event in coming Monday. It's called Day Without Childcare. So Erica asks, will you join them, providers at City Hall for a Day Without Childcare on Monday, May 8th?
You know what? Because I don't have my calendar in front of me, if you could forward that to my scheduling people, if I could do it, I'll do it. But the schedule's been crazy, and that's why it's been hard to get with you. The amount we jam into a mayoral candidate schedule is it's hard. But I'm for it. And if I could do it, I'll do it. If you could please forward that to my scheduling department.
Well, we recognize that, your schedule is very tight and we're getting towards the end of your time with us. So we did just want to give you a minute or two if there's any just generic statement, general statement around early education that you want to make or share with folks before we let you continue the rest of your day.
Yeah, I want to just frame this issue in this way. This city's problems emanate from a very substantial structural poverty that we haven't made much progress in it. And I really think the underinvestment at a child's young age is part of the reason we're in this circumstance. And if we ever don't want to have the distinction of being the poorest big city in the country, we need to invest more. And, some of the things that I think we need to invest in, of course, expand pre-K like we talked about. I also think things like rec centers, libraries, pools, when the children get a little older. I was chairman of Philadelphia Youth Network for many years, and it was always underfunded. We could never serve every child who wanted to learn how to work. And, these are investments that pay big dividends. And I don't think we appreciate the harm that we cause when you underinvest in children. And I will be a mayor that is aware of that, will advocate for that. And I know that the steps we make to improve our system and our funding will pay big dividends down the line.
Mr. Brown, we thank you very much for your time, and everyone who's joined us. We apologize if we couldn't get to all the questions. We tried to at least hit all the themes that were in the chat. Again, Mr. Brown, thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we look forward to hearing what else you have to say before the primary. We know it's coming very soon. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
We've got quite a few early educators and families on the line. And if it's okay with you, we're just going to let them jump into questions. Myself, I'm Tyrone Scott, and Sim Lowe from Children's Village will just be reading them so you don't have to hear a whole bunch of different voices. So if it works, we'll jump right in.
Sure.
Great. First question is generic. We're asking every candidate this. What would you do in your first 90 days to expand early learning opportunities?
In the first 90 days, we are going to review our level of funding, and we're going to figure out how we can increase those seats. For those of you who know me, I am no Johnny-come-lately supporter to early childhood education. I'm proud of the action we took on council, even when they put our pictures up in supermarkets to criticize those of us who made the funding of PHL pre-K a priority. And we will see how we can find a way to increase those seats. And I also want, and this is extremely important to me because I'm not just talking to you, I talk to providers and workers quite often, and we've got to figure out a way to increase the salaries for those people who do this work if we want to continue to get quality. So I'm going to the public sector, the private sector, local, state, and federal government to secure funding.
Excellent. That's actually one of the next questions that was on here is what could you do to help with funding, knowing that there's so much turnover. So thank you for that. We have another question asking about the day without childcare. You joined last year, I believe. It's going to be at City Hall Monday at 9 a.m. Folks want to know if you'll be able to stop by this year.
Oh, so listen, I'm not controlling my life right now. And listen, it makes me, for those of you who are on this call who know me, I feel very vulnerable. So what I'm going to ask that you do is text that or email that information to my team, Tanyelle or Sincere or Aaron. Let's let them get it ASAP because I would love to be there. I felt last year, and I thought about this after I left. I'm glad you brought it up. I felt last year just like I feel with the sanitation workers in particular. You let us go a day without trash being picked up, and you will see how essential the workers are to what we do. And with childcare, it's exactly the same thing. It's why I'm fighting hard to make some adjustments to traditional public education in what I propose. And if I can be there on Monday, I will. I'm telling you, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed being being with the workers. And quite frankly, I was also supportive of PHL pre-K because people didn't talk about it as an economic tool to put people on a path to self-sufficiency by supporting Black small business owners. We never talked about that, but I saw the number of Black women-owned home-based providers and those who were able to make the shift to get on commercial quarters and expand and, you know, more professionalize their operations. And I was extremely proud of that. So if I can be there on Monday, rest assured I will.
That's great. That's great. So next questions is on children with disability. How are you able to ensure they can access early childhood educations with appropriate support?
Well, number one, we need to make sure that there is a coordinated approach with Elwyn. I happen to have a son. I'm a part of the Old Moms Club. I had my son when I was 39, a month before I was about to turn 40. And my son needed speech therapy. He also needed occupational therapy. And we got those early supports through Elwyn. And what I've learned sometimes is that, particularly when I think about families that are where English is their second language, it's not their main language, and or just, you know, folks who need assistance. If you don't have the right advocate and or the right point of contact, sometimes, you know, people begin planning for you, no communication so that you understand how you get the best supports, the scheduling for the supports and services. So we've got to work with Elwyn extremely closely, and we've got to redefine to a certain degree that intersection between the services being provided along with the parents. And we have to do things that are convenient for parents and not just convenient for the providers. And with all due respect, I don't say that as from the outside looking in. I say that as a parent who needed that support.
And the next, sorry,
Okay.
The next question is, oh my goodness. The next question is on workers' compensations. How will you ensure that the adults that work in early childhood education get a livable wage that will ensure that they stay in the professions?
So listen, one of the things that I want to fight for, and I'm going to continue to fight for, and I was an early supporter of the fight for 15. I'm talking about a $15 minimum wage. But if you were to go to something and Google it for me when you can, it's the MIT living wage calculator. $15 is not even a living wage. For a single person right now, a living wage is at, according to the calculator, I think about $17.53 or $17.58. Can't remember the exact cents. Nevertheless, not only do we have to advocate for that in Harrisburg, but once we do that, guess what? Our providers, they're going to need access to additional revenue if that were to occur so that they can pay that amount. So it calls for strong intergovernmental cooperation between local, state, and federal government. And that's something that I will be unwavering in my support of. And for all of the providers, if there are any parents on, you know, a whole lot of people running for mayor can do a whole lot of talking about what their vision is and what they would do in the future. I want you to use as an example or a barometer about my commitment to early childhood education, not just what I say, but what I've done in the past and how I stood up before it was a popular thing to do. And I'm happy to see that some of my opponents who weren't for the beverage tax, who didn't support it, who used it as a way to get people upset and talk about how the tax was disproportionately impacting Black and brown people because, you know, we drunk the most sodas, but they were only thinking about us as consumers. They didn't think about early childhood education being the great equalizer. I'm a teacher by profession, a high school English teacher, NTE pass, Praxis pass. And I know that when a child gets into kindergarten, we know immediately those who had a structured, organized, access to organized early childhood education in pre-K. Well, I'm talking about when they're 3 and they're 4, because they are, you know, light ways ahead of those who did not. And so I'm going to do what I continue to do for the industry, but I'm also going to advocate for a higher rate, especially if we can increase the wage, because the providers can't do it.
You know,
They can't do it.
you brought up some really good points there, and this actually leads to another question that Ernie asked about making sure parents know about the different funding streams that they have open to them. What could your administration do to let folks know about not just PHL pre-K, but Child Care Works, Pre-K Counts, Head Start, and all the different programs that are available to them?
Ernie, thank you so very much for that question. And I appreciate that, Ernie, because I'm an organizational dynamics person. There is nothing that frustrates me more than all of the programs that we have functioning in the city. We don't have a standard way to communicate with the public. So this is what I've committed to doing. I'm going to have a mayor's community council in every council district. So that means we'll have 10 in each district for neighborhoods across the city. That is going to be a main point of distribution for access to information in neighborhoods across the city, and business associations, early childhood education providers, faith-based leaders, block captains, committee people. Everybody will have an opportunity to be a part of that. We will disseminate great information through that vehicle, but we also need to have it web-based and app-based. And I'm getting ready to say something that a lot of people may not get. We also have to make sure that the information is in our senior citizen centers. Why is that? Because there are a whole lot of senior citizens who are now raising their grandchildren. Cherelle, how do you know? It's called kinship care, but it's not because I read a white paper or I had to have a professor to tell me about it. I know because I was one of those kids. I lost my mother early. She was a single teenage mother, but my grandmother and my grandfather basically raised me since birth. And they weren't technical people. If they were here right now, as a matter of fact, my grandmother probably still be trying to use a rotary phone to call somebody. But we have to make sure that for those for whom English is not their primary language, all of our immigrant communities, and we have to make sure that our seniors, they have access to the paper, and we use our senior centers in every way possible. But we just have to have a more coordinated approach, and that's how my mind works, and that's what I'll do in the Parker administration.
That leads to another question asked by Melissa. You talked about making sure that everyone gets the information in different ways. How would you elevate parent voices and let them kind of feed your administration policies around early education?
One of the things.
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask everyone to please mute themselves. Yes, thank you very much. Ms. Parker, go ahead.
One of the things that when you heard me mention the Mayor's Community Council, for those of you who would like to know sort of how it functions, it's not a new concept for me. I founded a Mayor's Community Council in the area that I live in. And the way we do it is we have a Mount Airy Community Council, right? We did it in our community, and we have different committees, right? A public safety committee, quality of life, education committee. And you have groups that work through these committees. When you have this structure, you have to have one that specifically focuses on early childhood education. Because the last thing that I'm ever going to give anybody in the city the ability to say about me, because I haven't done it in my district, is that we are going to make sure that the only time our people interact with government and to get information about government, it's not going to be while I'm running for re-election or I'm running and asking for somebody's vote. Government will be structured that way. And that is going to be the difference in what we do. And when we talk about accessing those services, we've got to be talking about 24 hours. Right? It's nothing more frustrating, and I won't name it. There is an early childhood education provider that has a super big sign on their business, and they advertise that 24-hour care is available at their location. However, if you go in and talk to the provider, who I know well, who's been very active in the community, and I said to her, well, somebody came in and they told you that they worked the night shift, and they don't want anybody to come into their house. They would prefer that they bring their child to you. And you said that you're not available. And she said to me, Cherelle, I advertise it because that's the way we started it. But particularly since the pandemic, she said, I can't find the staff to do that. So we've got to train. We got to use CCP. We've got to train our students. Even in the school district of Philadelphia, I'm talking about bringing the building trades in and all of the industries that are thriving, training for city jobs. You know, I don't care if it's police or fire, water, sanitation. We should be training our kids to get prepared to do these jobs, and early childhood education is also one of those areas that we should be training for. So I just needed to state that for the record. I apologize to you all that I have to go. I'm en route right now to the committee of 70 candidates debate. I've got to do a prep call with my team, but I want you to know that I'm readily available. I'm also no Johnny come lately to supporting you all and early childhood educators, you know, in general, particularly those who are home based. I was proud to be the lead advocate to ensure that backroom technical supports for those providers was available. And I'm not going to change in midstream. Who I say I am, and I don't change my message depending on the audience. But I can't win without you all supporting me and being there for me. And I hope I can count on your support.
Ms. Parker, we think.
There's a couple of requests for posters for you.
Yes, now this is what and y'all better, if y'all tell anybody about this, I'm going to get mad at you. Let me see if this is here. Okay, my campaign office. Okay, here it is. Y'all won't get mad at me because I was about to tell you. Yeah, I was about to tell you, I didn't know what the number for you to call, but I have it right here. My campaign office is located at 8319 Stenton Avenue. That's right at Stenton and Allen's Lane, like one half a block above Stenton and Mount Pleasant. I'm right on the corner, and you'll see the posters. They also have a telephone number for me, which is 267-259-9196. 267-259-9196. And I do have a website that's called CherelleParker.com. I thank you all so very much, and I can't win without you. If you're not talking to your parents, talking to other providers, and my hope is that the message is Cherelle Parker didn't just start supporting us when she came to ask for our vote. She's been in our corner even when it wasn't easy, even when the millionaires said you can't get this funding source because it's going to cut into their margins. I didn't care. I did it because it was the right thing to do. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And she gave us ways to contact her. So I know there are a lot of questions that didn't get quite answered, but you know her campaign. So she's definitely available and accessible to us. And we'll make sure that we also provide her with the information for Day Without Childcare to see if she can join us, so folks can interact with her in person.